Lynn, let me ask you, we were talking a second ago about actually getting the information from management. I think very often, we've all been in either executive or advising executives roles in addition to the board. The management team has a view of the company, and they're curating the information that the board's going to see very often that goes into the board packet. How do you get access to the information that you want to see?
I think in a nice way, you demand it. There's a great tendency for, I think, some management teams to put 800 or 1,000 pages in a board deck, and hopefully maybe even tire the directors out. I don't know what the strategy is there, but anyway, one of the areas of I've been on a lot of boards and I've seen a lot of decks. One of the areas that generally is not there unless I push it is valuation gaps to peers. And so understanding those valuation gaps and the sources of them, is it some of the parts? Is it a conglomerate discount? Is it you just have a lousy strategy? I mean, understanding why they're there and what it is you can do about them, and having that idea of value creation in front of you, both what has occurred over a period of time and what value the strategy that you're on now is creating. And is it creating value that's competitive with the peer group that you are being looked at? And if it's not, what are the actions that are being taken to close that gap? And can you communicate both the strategy clearly, succinctly, that a fifth grader would understand it, and that you can clearly articulate what you're doing about proactively to close those gaps?
One of the things I urge directors to do, whether they're seasoned directors or new directors, is challenge the management team on what's in the board package. People that come on a board from another board often say, well, we used to look at this and this and this. Why aren't those in the board materials? But one of the biggest problems, and Lynn, you sort of talked about it with size, is that there's no natural limit for an iPad about how many pages of documents you can put on. There used to be a limitation. We were joking about it before. If the board book didn't fit in the FedEx box, it didn't go out. So one of the things I tell corporate secretaries or those that prepare materials is print out all the materials. Take a look. If it's too big a stack, and it's not just the board materials, it's committee materials too. If it's too big a stack and you're giving it to the directors even a week before the meeting, how are they going to go through it? One of the things that Lynn did when she sent out the materials for her board, she was CEO, was she had a very comprehensive cover note. And she explained what was new in the materials, what had been eliminated from the materials, and what the meeting was going to focus on so that the board members could come into the meeting prepared. When board members don't have time to read all the materials, or they don't know what's the most important materials that's going to be covered at the meeting, or they don't know what some of the issues are, you're not going to be as effective a board. And it's up to the board members, frankly, to challenge the management team or the group about, do we have too many pages in there? If you're a director at some point in time, you're going to be involved in a litigation, is my guess. Being able to understand and being able to answer questions as to what you focused on in a meeting that was 6 months or a year ago. And somebody says, well, there were 2,000 pages there. How did you have time to read it since you only got the package 2 days before? Or even in some other situations, Lynn was pointing this out, these board books actually came from virtual data rooms. It was a service that was used. One of the secrets of virtual data rooms is you can track who reads what, how much time they spent on it, things of that nature. We urge our clients to turn off that feature, because the last thing you want is them singling out a director who never opened the board book before the board meeting or things like that. And, if you're a paper person, there's nothing wrong with you asking the board, the corporate secretary, to send you a paper copy of the materials. You don't have to keep all that stuff in the files, but you can bring it to the meeting. You can be prepared to talk about it. Different directors learn in different ways. They're just like our kids. They don't all learn the same way. You should do what makes sense for each particular director.
Well, as far as materials, I just became the lead independent on one of the boards I'm on. And the very first question I asked of management as I was coming into this role is, what are you preparing for us, the board, that's just done out of habit, that's not useful to the business? And how do we get rid of that? And what are you not preparing, or what do you think we should be seeing that we're not seeing? And then I asked the directors the same question. What in this book is unnecessary? You don't want to have make work. You don't want to have make work for management or for the board. Make work includes reading and highlighting pages that aren't relevant. So, and then, how do you get access to data? I think you ask. One of the things I do is I'm reading the Journal or the New York Times and I see things, I think, gee, I wonder how this relates to our company. I'll shoot a note to the CEO and I'll say, found this article interesting. Here's a simple question. I'm not doing it for a board presentation. It's just because I always have a learning curve to climb, and I'm not going to wait till one of our quarterly meetings when I've forgotten about that article. I just shoot it off and get an answer fairly quickly. I think the other thing you have to do is you can't be afraid of looking stupid, particularly when you're new. Every business has got a host of acronyms that if you're not in that business, they might as well be speaking a foreign language to you. And so I'm never shy to say, what does that mean? Because I know that 6 quarters from now, if I ask that question, and it's been used every quarter in the board meeting, then I will look like it. Then I will be an idiot. I won't just look like an idiot, I will be an idiot. So, I think just being curious and not being afraid to ask questions. And I noticed in David's first answer, when he was giving his answer and talking as if he was on a board, all he did was end sentences with a question mark. It was never with a period and certainly never with an exclamation point. I think boards are great. And maybe it's because he's a lawyer and a law school professor and he uses the Socratic method and all they ever do is ask questions to get people to learn. But it's a great way to steer keeping the culture that Lynn has talked about is so important. Questions are less offensive than statements with a finger.
One of the first things I tell directors when they're thinking about becoming somebody who wants to become a director on a public company or they're a new director, sometimes people get in the habit of, well, I only have to worry about it the 4, 5, or 6 board meetings a year. You're a director every day of the week, every hour of the day. And it's important that you remember that. It doesn't mean that you have to be, it has to be top of mind, but things like what was just said about reading the newspaper, reading research reports, don't just rely on the company to get you things. If you see something that's interesting or you have access to somebody that can send you research reports about the industry or otherwise, look at those because those will give you particular perspectives. And sometimes it makes sense to share them with your fellow directors. If you're always thinking about what's my role as a director and you realize that you're always on, you will be a better director. Because the most important things that happen in the company happen between the board meetings, not at the board meeting.